Hi, my name is Linnea Nichols, and here is my presentation on eating disorders. Today we'll be talking about several types of eating disorders. There is anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, binge eating disorder, and of course there are many other types of eating disorders that are either not as common or subcategories of these other eating disorders. As far as the history of eating disorders, many cases have not been recorded by scientists, but merely based off of historical events. So the first cases of anorexia nervosa date all the way back to the 13th and 14th century for religious purposes. It was common in the Catholic Church for women to starve themselves. Bulimia nervosa was first written about scientifically in 1979. However, many historians have brought up the very valid point of how kings and queens would throw lavish parties full of gluttonous affairs, so they would just eat until they felt like they couldn't stuff any more into their mouth. And they would then forcefully make themselves throw up so that they could fit more food into their stomach. On one hand, that does fit the definition of what bulimia nervosa is, because it is binging and then purging, but it's not for the same purposes as people who are actually ill with bulimia. Then there is binge eating disorder. This is was only documented in 1959, was the first scientific document written about binge eating. But of course, there probably were many cases before 1959. So the symptoms of anorexia nervosa, there's a lot, unfortunately. And one of the most common symptoms is not intaking enough nutrition or enough calories to sustain a healthy body weight. So many people who are anorexic are a very unhealthy weight. So the reason why they're so underweight is because they have restrictions on how much they can eat, and they're very obsessive behaviorally and with their thoughts on what they're allowed to eat and what they're not allowed to eat. Their self-esteem is also directly linked to what their appearance is. When they look at who they are as a person, they don't look at their personality, they look at the person they see in the mirror and the amount that they weigh. Many of the causes for eating disorders are all very similar, but they vary case to case. So for anorexia, society has had a very big impact on how women especially view themselves, and there is a very high standard to have a perfect body, and fashion, high industry fashion, portrays women as very, very thin and are often an unhealthy body weight. There is also the biological factor of if your family has a history of anorexia, then you may be more susceptible. And there's also the psychological aspect, which links into your biological genetics and everything. But the psychological aspects is a lot of people who are anorexic often have other mental illnesses like depression or anxiety or obsessive compulsive disorder. So back to how high fashion industry portrays what their idea of beauty is. I have a couple of pictures showing a campaign that is "You Are Not a Sketch," because in high industry fashion, they often portray extreme anorexia as beautiful. So that causes a huge skewed perception of what a healthy body is. Whether you believe it's beautiful or not, it's not healthy. Since it is more common in the fashion industry to see anorexia, it is more common in women, but it is found in men occasionally. Anorexia also has the highest mortality rate of any psychological disease. It's about 5.6%, which is very high. It's often not due to suicide, but mainly because of heart failure, or the body just cannot sustain any longer with the nutrients it's not being provided. The symptoms of bulimia, what bulimics do is they consume vast quantities of food, and then so they binge eat, and then it's followed by purging, which is induced vomiting. Their self-esteem, just like anorexia, is directly linked to their body image, and it's often a very vicious cycle of binge eating, and then self-hatred ensues, so they force themselves to throw up so that they will feel like they won't gain the weight that they just consumed. So it's a very, very vicious cycle, and it's often very easy to hide because they're usually in the normal range of weight, and you see them eat, so there's that. There are several aspects of the society's impact on bulimia is similar to anorexia, because the individual feels that they have to live up to the high standards of high fashion, or even just the standards of their spouse or just anyone around them. So what ends up happening is they get involved in a vicious cycle where they justify their eating, which is unhealthy, and they binge. And since they feel that they have to live up to these high standards, they then induce vomiting, which causes a lot of health problems. I've shown a picture of the cycle that occurs, and this isn't 100% accurate in the sense that bulimia does not involve laxatives, but what ends up happening is they are usually on a strict and rigid diet because they feel they have to live up to these very high standards, and they feel ashamed and depressed about the way they look, and they feel guilty, and they feel like they've failed in general, so they break their rules or their diet, and they binge eat, and then they purge, and the cycle starts all over again. So the health problems that are often linked to bulimia is many people who have bulimia develop kidney problems, horrible dehydration problems, and it also destroys the enamel in your teeth, because when an individual induces vomiting or vomits in general, it destroys the enamel. So an excess amount of stomach acid over time breaks down the teeth.